My name's Susan Lawrence, Fritz.
Oh, hi, hi
Nice to see
Susan.
you. Hi.
Unfortunately, I cannot see you unless maybe very small there in
Yeah,
the.
this is
In
me.
the
Yes. Yes. If I have the camera like this, then we can actually see the screen as well. See
okay, okay.
you as well.
Yeah.
That's why we've got it like that.
No,
Um,
no, good.
so I was just discussing with one of the students here. He was telling me that he went bird watching on our campus and recently and got 79 species of birds.
Wow.
So that's the total list that we have for this campus. Does that include the cassowary? Oh, nice. So we have two campuses in Australia, and we have this contest between who has the most diversity. And Conrad is a zoologist in Townsville, and he's saying, well, because I argue that of course we've got more mammal species, including tree kangaroos, and then he came
Mhm.
back and said, well, we have more, and they have more reptiles, and he was suggesting that maybe more bird species, but one of the students here, Nat, was just telling me that they've now got a quite significant list. And given your topic on biodiversity loss in an urbanizing world, I just thought that was quite a nice finding for us
Mhm.
to have so many species on our campus here in Cairns.
Because where's the location of the campus? Like, is it quite centrally located in the city or?
No, we're in the north and we are contiguous with rainforest, with the World
Mhm.
Heritage Area. So we have national
Mhm.
parks up in the hills behind us. So, yes, that does benefit us enormously. And of course, being rainforest helps a lot. Anyway, I think that we normally start at 4:05. So I'd like to begin and welcome everyone to TESS and our weekly seminar series. And I'd like to start off by acknowledging the traditional owners on the land that we meet today, the Jabagai, Irriganji, and Gamoy Yidinji people, and to honour their unique cultural and spiritual relationship to the land and pay my respects to the ancestors and elders past, present, and emerging. And so today it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Professor Fritz Kleinschroth, who's joining us from Germany, and it's quite early in the morning, I gather. Fritz teaches and conducts research on the conservation and restoration of biodiversity, particularly in the context of land systems and vegetation change. And he uses spatial data from drones, satellite imagery to analyse vegetation changes and to communicate biodiversity issues. He completed a dual degree in 2016 as part of a EU scholarship at Agro Paris Tech in France and Bangor Uni in Wales on roads in rainforest, which is a topic of which is the same topic I did my PhD on, actually. And he also won a Miriam Award in the same year for a talk on roadless space and logging in intact forest landscapes on the Congo Basin. Fritz held postdoctoral and senior research positions at the Ecosystem Management Group at ETH Zurich and was a fellow of the Robert Bosch Foundation for Transformational Leadership. In July, Fritz has just commenced as a professor of planning for biodiversity and vegetation development at the Institute of Environmental Planning in Leibniz University. And so if you just give him a warm welcome, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susan, and thank you very much to everyone for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be at least virtually in Cairns. I hope one day I will also make it in person. Um, yeah, I'm like you already heard my short introduction, Fritz Kleinschroth, and I'm still talking to you right now from Switzerland, where I used to work for the last almost 8 years at ETH Zurich. But I am already, as Susan said, professor for planning for biodiversity development at Hanover University. And today I will try to put together different aspects of my work, both in the tropical realm, since I'm talking to you mostly at the TESS, but I will link that with some of the other work I have moved into that is quite, I would say, globally relevant, which is about urbanization. And I titled my talk "Bending the Curve of Biodiversity Loss in an Urbanizing World." So why urbanization? I think it is one of the most dominating and transformative land system trends that we are witnessing in this century. Now more than half of the world's population lives in cities and urbanized areas, and we're moving well towards 2/3 or even 3/4 of the global population who will live in cities in the next 20 or 30 years. And this, of course, is very important both for consumption patterns, but also for the well-being of people. And I would say this trend has a lot to do with many of the big crises that we're facing currently, including climate, biodiversity, and public health. And the main message that I want to transfer with this talk is that I see cities both as part of the problem and of the solution for the biodiversity crisis. So why is that? I think we share a common goal here when you invited me, which is bending the curve of biodiversity loss. And when we talk about that in the context of urbanization, I think the best way to approach it is a nested, sparing, sharing approach. I guess we all agree that it's not only cities and their expansion that is making urbanization, but also infrastructure networks that now span the globe, not only for agriculture, but also for resource extraction. And both of these elements, of course, are also feeding the city. So they're also driven by urban people and urban consumption. And in this context of a planetary urbanization, how can we still reach net gain of biodiversity? And on a global scale or also on larger landscape scales, I think we need to move towards land sparing to make space for conservation and restoration. And this we can reach it by good road management and by urban densification. Just as a reminder about the land sharing, land sparing context, it is one of the big challenges in conservation to ask, is it better to conserve nature on site, so especially within agriculture areas, or is it better to set aside large areas where we don't do any land use and instead use the remaining land more intensively? And like you will see during my talk, like there is no universal answer, but I'm proposing this nested approach here. And I think I'm also in line with the global biodiversity framework, for example, of the UN, who recently adopted the 30 by 30 principle, which means 30% protected areas by 2030. But I think it is important that also within this spared land, let's say the urban and the infrastructure area, which is essential for humans to live and to thrive, also in there we need green areas and we need biodiversity for our own well-being. And here I think in this small scale areas we need shared spaces for human and non-human nature. And I will now show you, like throughout my work, how this nested approach can be realized, and how it hopefully creates benefits for everyone. So I start with some work I did previously, and this is more on road management, especially in tropical forests, but also elsewhere. And I'm putting this in the context of planetary urbanization. So the concept of planetary urbanization was founded by Neil Brenner and Christian Schmidt, and they essentially say that we're talking when we talk about planetary urbanization, we don't talk about only about cities, but we also talk about the spaces in between, and which have very much become integral part of the worldwide urban fabric. And that spans far into very remote places, including tropical forests. And the most visual part of this are road networks and other infrastructures. And I've been working on that quite a bit. Here in global view of night lights, which can be a good indicator of infrastructure and urban development. And I combine this with shipping line frequencies, which can be a symbol for all the goods and resources that we ship around the world every day. And now, if we zoom into one of the areas with actually very little visual urban development, here in Central Africa, in the Congo Basin, then we would expect some very wild nature there, and that's not completely untrue, but also this area is densely covered by road networks. Of course, it depends on the scale. So here it looks like we don't see exactly that. Of course, there are protected areas which are yellow here, and they are still widely road free. We also have some large wetlands which are road free, but the forest areas that are accessible, they actually have very dense road networks for timber extraction. And we already see here different colors, which we identify based on remote sensing as roads that are more permanent and roads that are more temporary. And especially everything that's green here are roads that were there before, but they are not, at least not visible anymore because they are abandoned and overgrown. But also in red, like all these are currently open logging roads, and they are on a daily basis expanding into other areas of the forest. And the driver of this road development is global. So we're talking about tropical timber as a telecoupled commodity, because the extraction is driven by demand far away. And this demand has also changed. Like if we look here at where most of the timber from Central Africa went to in the earlier 2000s, this is mostly in Europe and partly in Asia. And this has changed completely to being almost completely absorbed by China in 2018, which is one of the most urbanizing regions of the world. So yeah, I think it's not too far-fetched to say that road development in Central Africa also has a lot to do with furnishing urban areas in Asia. And I've been working quite intensively of how to improve and how to include land sparing in this road development in Central Africa. with the aim to reduce the spatial and the temporal footprint of these roads. One of the approaches is, for example, to reuse old logging roads and to intensify the road use in some places and instead leave other areas completely road free. This is now also included in the FSC certification approach of conserving intact forest landscapes. Very difficult topics there, but I think they are at least on a good way to follow a sparing approach. And very other aspects from the ecological side of these roads is also that that we don't see them all as the same, but that we have much better information now which roads are permanent and which roads are only very temporary used. And like I showed also based on field work, that the persistence of many of these roads is actually very short, and if they are effectively closed, then biodiversity, in this case, it's woody species diversity, can recover quite well, actually. And so in less than, in about 15 years after abandonment, we already have similar biodiversity on the road track as in the adjacent forest. So if we let them recover, they actually recover quite well. And the same has also been shown for fauna. Like I only have anecdotal observations here that when I was following some of the abandoned logging roads in Cameroon, like I actually came across this nest of a gorilla, which was right in the middle of the former road, because once poachers cannot enter these roads anymore, the fauna thrives quite well. And this has also been confirmed very recently by a study which I was not involved in, by Yuri Swerts, who showed that the management of timber extraction, and the roads are a very important part of this, can actually benefit large mammals quite well, as shown by comparison between FSC and non-FSC certified areas. So here we come into the sharing strategy within the larger sparing strategy, where we also approach the roads themselves as potential habitats. And if we do that well, and if the control is there over the roads, then we can actually ensure that also within a smaller area, the access to the overall forest is actually quite limited. So this is one concession in Cameroon, where I followed the road construction over the course of 15 years. And we can see that the permanent roads are actually very limited, and the temporary roads are only in those areas where really wood harvesting takes place. So this is the road part, and now we like I'm trying to transfer these ideas also to the urban development part, because if we want to on the long term change patterns and really bend the curve of biodiversity loss, of course we need to go into the forest, but I think we also need to go into the urban areas and follow a completely different land sparing approach there by planning dense yet livable cities to avoid urban sprawl. And how to do that has been shown to us by an experience which was almost universal around the world and to different degrees. And those were the experiences during COVID-19, which raised very important question about how can we make a city more livable, and how can we make sure that people are actually willing to live in a dense city. And of course, in so far, the COVID was helpful because we were living a bit in extreme times, and we can compare that across the world. And the big question is, like, how did human nature relationships change during this time, especially during especially in urban areas. And quite early on, we observed that the demand for going for a walk increased a lot, at least based on Google search. And we published this paper quite early on in the pandemic. But the big question was, like, how representative is that of different regions, and how did the changes in green space demand also depend on availability of green space and wealth. And for this, we conducted a systematic review to get the full global picture of, like, there were really hundreds of publications from different parts of the world. And so this is now the outcome of this systematic review, where we showed if the use of green space decreased in pink or increased in green. And already here we see quite strong patterns emerging. Europe is made a bit bigger because a lot more studies have been conducted there, and there we see the green, so the increase is a bit more dominating. Australia also mostly green, if you see it down here, but then if we look both in the US but also large parts of Latin America and a few studies from Africa, we see that the use actually decreased during COVID. So we have quite a contrasting behavior here. Also, overall more decrease than increases, which was surprising, at least for us from a European point of view. And we published this in this paper, which came out earlier this year in Nature Cities. So what this data, and it's quite a unique data set because we have such a global coverage of similar observations. And what this reveals is a strong global disparity in urban green space use, which is largely driven, and this we could show it based on the information, largely driven by wealth, which is linked to access to and availability of green spaces. So we have a significant difference between the decrease and the increase cases in their GDP per capita, which you can see here in this very simple comparison of the areas that increased and those that decreased their use. Okay, so I'm showing this to show that we have big equity problems in cities. There are not only differences regionally, but also within cities between different social and cultural economic groups. And the distance to the next green space is highly unequal. And that's why I think we can conclude that the COVID-19 pandemic appeared to exacerbate pre-existing disparities in park use, raising environmental justice concerns that might even compound the health crisis for marginalized populations even more. And as long as we don't solve these issues, I think it will be very difficult to get to the compact city where people don't want to move out to their house with garden outside of the city in the suburbs anymore. And And to change that, I'm now presenting a few ideas about land sharing in cities, which has to do with nature-based solutions for compact yet green cities instead of sprawling ones. So this is again the nested sharing sparing approach. And there's some very obvious examples. So I will show some examples here from my neighborhood in Switzerland, in Zurich, where I'm still living and where I used to live for several years now. Unfortunately, not so much longer because I'm moving to Germany soon. But it's still a very interesting neighborhood because here we really try to make a difference in living. And this is one of the examples, just to remove existing impervious surfaces and to green it. Very, very simple yet efficient, both for well-being and biodiversity. Another example is stream daylighting. So we used to have a lot of culverted streams around here. But there were a lot of initiatives to bring these back to light. And the amazing things is that it's not only very small changes that happen, but actually quite big ones in combination with beavers that are coming back all across the city and build dams in these daylighted streams, which again creates a lot of other new habitats. And I wrote this short article about the contact with nature, which this allows. So people are really impressed and amazed how to see such a nice mammal in front of them. Maybe in Australia that's a bit more common, but yeah, here in Europe it's quite rare to see that so closely. And I would claim that that this contact with biodiversity also in the city eventually increases people's support for biodiversity. And yeah, another example more from the tropical realm is for a nature-based solution is floating vegetation invasions. In this case, they are not so much the cause of problems as often stated, but more a symptom of an overall problem, which is pollution. And this this pollution, of course, allows these mass blooms of floating plants, but it's also an often unappreciated ecosystem services because these plants soak up a lot of the excess nutrients. In this case, we investigated phosphorus and nitrogen, which are taken up by the floating plants. So just one more example from a completely different context, how if we work with nature within the built environment, it can bring us a long way already without technological approaches. So yeah, we're talking about green cities, but there's also a lot of allegedly green cities, which only use that label, but actually do have a massive ecological impact. And one example for this is in Vientiane in Laos, where this wetland, which is quite central in the city, a huge wetland which was used by fishermen for a long time, but also like used to have very big time biodiversity, which is now being transformed into they call it a green city because it has some remaining green and blue areas. But yeah, this wetland is basically destroyed for some Chinese vision of a new city, which is quite detrimental. Another example is Forest City in Malaysia. They also call it Forest City because there's some green on the balconies and around, but after all, it's a big artificial island, which is built right into a mangrove zone just off the Malaysian coast. So, so of course, it doesn't only depend. It doesn't only help that we make cities green, but it also depends where we put those cities. And it's always better to infill existing urban areas than create completely new ones. And that brings me back to the cooperative housing in Switzerland, from where I'm talking to you right now. And I'm also showing some other examples from around the world for like very small and sometimes bigger measures, how we can ensure that cities become shared spaces between human and non-human life, including green walls and roofs, constructed wetlands, and the daylighted streams that I mentioned already. And yeah, I claim that all this belongs together and fits together within the global biodiversity framework. So you all heard about the big agenda of the United Nations from 1.5 years ago, which have a number of targets how we can get to exactly bend the curve of biodiversity loss. And I hope after seeing my different examples, you will agree that target 2 to restore 30% of all degraded ecosystems is actually quite closely related to target 12, which is to enhance green spaces and urban planning for human well-being and biodiversity. So there are two sides of the same coin, and I think we cannot reach one without reaching the other. And how to do that? It's of course important that we also keep in mind social aspects, because in the end, it's people who support, who need to support this agenda and who need to live together. And just to again show like which are the projected urban land expansion rates over the next almost 100 years. And now if we overlay this with the global priority areas for ecosystem restoration, as proposed by Strasbourg et al. In 2020, we see that the tropics, the global tropics, of course, have a key role in this. And what we now did was to link this agenda with just to show where are all the people in this map. And yes, they are there, and we actually have the highest population density in the highest restoration priority areas in this map, which of course raises big social questions and also urban questions, because many of these people already live in cities or will move to cities in the near future. And that is quite important. I mean, following my talk, I hope you agree that it's that it may also be helpful for reaching the restoration agenda. But of course, it also raises big social questions, especially given that the Human Development Index, so an index for where do the people stand economically and also socially, is that the HDI on average is much lower in those high priority areas for restoration. So of course we have to be very cautious in managing these restoration efforts. And yeah, our PhD student Sarah Löfquist wrote a very good article about that, which came out last year, about the social considerations that we need to take into account to improve the equity and effectiveness of ecosystem restoration. And yeah, with this, I'm rounding up my talk back at the more global level. And yeah, my main take-home message for today is that biodiverse urban green spaces in compact cities are the precondition to be able to make space for restoration of biodiversity elsewhere. And with this, thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to further discussions and collaborations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fritz. I'll just ask first if there's a question in the audience. Does anyone have a question? So I guess the question, I've lived in the developing world, and one of the things that you noted was, well, you notice is that they're very much concrete jungles. And it's often because of the concern about zoonotic disease and mosquito-vectored diseases like dengue and malaria, which tend to be associated with mosquitoes associated with humans. And so, you know, I can kind of see the reason why some of these poorest areas on the planet are often the areas with the least amount of green spaces, is that people are trying to avoid that risk associated with disease. And I just wondered what you thought about that comment.
Yes, it's a very tricky one, because of course there's always this ecosystem service and disservice relationship. But I think in the end it boils down to management, and I'm not an epidemiologist, but I think there are ways to manage green spaces also in the tropical realm without and at the same time controlling certain diseases, including malaria, let's say. So many cities have managed to do that, and I think there's also quite simple measures, as like especially controlling the breeding sites of mosquitoes, which I think is done in many tropical cities that do have urban wetlands. For example, I showed the example of Bangkok, who just like opened a huge constructed wetland right in the middle of the city. But I guess in combination with fish stocks within those open water areas, they managed to control the mosquitoes relatively well. So sometimes I think the fear of the pests is bigger than it is in reality. Without saying that, of course, we need to control these issues.
Yes, I guess the thing, yeah, exactly what you've said. It's the fear, but also the investment by local government to make sure that they're building areas that reduce the risks and then I have to say that image you showed of Vietnam with the wetland, all I could think of was Hunger Games. That looks just like this looks like the Hunger Games site, the Laos image that you showed. Of the converted wetland.
Okay, well, you have to. I didn't watch Hunger Games, so you have to remind me what.
Well, you're really missing out. Okay. Do I have any other questions from the audience? Is there a question online? No questions online. Yeah.
Thank you for that. I wondered if you had any thoughts on the disparity between increases in urban green space use and decreases across different geographical areas, and whether the incidence of lockdown might be one of the most significant factors there.
Yes, of course. I mean, that would be the most intuitive explanation, and like I was too short to show the data on this. So of course we also included in our analysis, we also included the comparison of the let's say, lockdown severity. Like there's a, like Oxford University published this COVID strictness index over time, and we also included that in our statistical model, and it turned out that it was much less. Let's say the effect of the COVID policy strictness was much less than the effect of the GDP in this case, so the wealth, which was quite surprising, because we thought it would be obvious that if it's super strict, then that would influence it most. But as we all remember, like these lockdowns, of course, were also coming and going, and overall it depended more on the availability of green space if people went out than on the actual or it's of course combined. Because it depends mostly on the availability of green space close to the places where people were still allowed to at least walk their dog or something. And those places which didn't have it and had very strict lockdowns, of course, in combination, then it would be the most difficult for people.
Okay, well, thank you, Fritz. That was a very interesting talk, and I'm a bit of a land sparer myself rather than land sharer. I think I've seen a great deal of more success, I think, from a biodiversity perspective with land sparing, but it may be something that, but there's always good arguments for both sides. And anyway, well, thank you very much for your time today. And I'm just sorry that actually we didn't spin the camera so you could see the happy faces in the audience watching your talk. You were looking at this very empty side. But thank you for joining us, and we really appreciate your talk today.
Okay, well, thank you very much for inviting me, for having me.